Greetings, good people. Welcome to another episode of Choice Words. I am your host, J. Artist Wright with Freedom to Choose Schools. And today's episode is about access and opportunity. I live in a world where I am entrenched in education policy, unlike most of our listeners. But even in my existence, I have found most recently that there are these terms that are coming up, ESAs, FTCs, SGOs, ECCAs, all these different terms that all relate to a changing of the tide in our education system. When we look at a national scale, some of you may know about some of the things that have happened as far as like the dismantling of the Department of Ed, the shifting of resources, the shifting of departments. But today, I am so happy to be joined by someone who's going to break it all down for us in layman's terms, something that we can all understand and be educated on and be able to take this and actually enlighten us as far as what does it actually mean to learn more about the other opportunities that there are in our space. So as always, we're talking about school choice from the perspective of Black and Brown communities. And I am excited to be joined by Mr. Shaka Mitchell.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me, Jay.
And so before we dive in, Shaka, I mean, I've just been so impressed with, just your knowledge and just your energy and just the expansion of work that you've done. For our listeners, I want to share a little bit about Shaka, and then I'll let him share a little bit more that I may have missed. But Shaka is a senior fellow with the American Federation for Children. He's also worked in several education networks, charter networks. He actually began his career in ed policy. He has a law degree from Wake Forest Law School. He's worked for the Center for Education Reform, and he's also a professor at Belmont University. Shaka is also the chair of the Tennessee State Advisory on the United States Commission on Civil Rights, which is huge. And again, just overall, just a man of tremendous education and knowledge. And Shaka, let me know, is there anything else I need to let people know about who you are?
That was very kind. You got it all, but maybe most important, I'm a parent, so I'm a father and husband, and that's where my most important work is.
Yeah, true indeed, true indeed. So again, this episode is about access and opportunity. One of the things that I wanted to share is, Shaka, when you and I met, I was just so intrigued by your personal story. We always want to start the episodes just grounding people on like, who is it that we're talking to, right? And so before we jump into just like all of these terms and this work, like share with us how, what was this moment for you of clarity, especially coming from having a law background? What was that moment, and what's your personal story that brings you to this space?
Sure. Well, I'll keep it brief, but again, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation. When you talk about your passion to center these conversations around Black and Brown children, well, that's me. My father's African American. My mother is Puerto Rican. I grew up in New York in very much working class and low income communities. And the neighborhood schools that we were zoned for were not great schools. They weren't great academically, and they weren't safe either. And so, there's many parents I know who can still relate to that. And like, what do you do? And you feel stuck. We had the great fortune of being able to attend a Catholic school. We had to go, it was, a town over, and it was sometimes long bus rides and long commutes. But we were able to do that. And I really believe that education made the difference for me and for my siblings. And I really think that's kind of where it starts for me. I think now in some ways it's come full circle because I have 3 daughters of my own. They're school age. And, just like the parents listening, we're just trying to figure it out from year to year. How do we navigate this new education ecosystem in a way that meets the needs of each one of our children individually, meets them in their uniqueness with their gifts and talents, and appreciates that one system cannot possibly work for the 55 million school-age children in our country.
I wanted to share, and you may know this already, but I wanted to share with our listeners that Freedom to Choose Schools, we did a polling last year, and it specifically polled Black and Latino voters and school-age parents. And in that polling, we found something to be really profound, and that is that 68% of Black and Latino voters say political interference is the biggest threat that they feel embodies our educational system currently. Um, it's something that you deal with pretty regularly. Can you speak to us a little bit about the current state of, I guess, politics, and when we think about education, as far as like, what are we seeing from the left and what are we seeing from the right, just to get a sense of like what's out there and who's saying what?
Yes, I think that it will come as no surprise that education is political, as are most things these days, right? Um, so, let me first say that American Federation for Children, we are a nonpartisan organization, and we work across the country, which means that we work with Republicans, we work with Democrats, we work with independents, mostly at the state level, because as a friend of ours, yours and mine, Jay, mentor as well, Dr. Howard Fuller, has said, like, when you give a child a scholarship, they don't ask whether or not it's a Republican or a Democratic scholarship.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, that being said, there are some just realities about where I would say the most sort of forward thinking reforms are happening around the country. Right now, what you're seeing is that more Republicans tend to be uh, open minded to the concept of educational choice. And that is in a variety of different ways. That might be charter schools, it might be private school choice, whether it's with voucher programs or education scholarship accounts, um, tuition tax credits, lots of different things, micro schooling, whatever. And honestly, I think what you could say certainly about the National Democratic Party right now is that it has lacked a vision. It's just kind of lacked a strong vision. Now, that's not every single Democrat who's out there. It's not to say that every single Republican who's out there supports choice. You're going to have differences of opinion within a state and certainly around the country. But where we're seeing the most reform is happening in states that have a Republican controlled General Assembly or legislature and a Republican governor. And I think that might be counterintuitive to a lot of the people who are listening.
Yeah, indeed. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because, majority of us don't want to get involved in politics, or if we do, we kind of have a hard stance or a hard principle of like which one is which. But one thing that I often say is that in education, it doesn't matter. Education should be nonpartisan overall. And I've thought that this episode was so important because of so many opportunities that are out there that have been introduced primarily by a conservative party, and just off of that alone, people are like, nope, don't want to hear it, don't want to talk about it. It's, there's something to it. And the reality is that even if there's also opportunity, right? Like, I can't speak for anyone. I don't know. I consider myself an independent, so I'm like directly in the middle of both. However, when I read about, for example, like, I think there's 18 states now that have an ESA, which is an education savings account. And out of those 18, about a dozen of them have a universal eligibility. And so for our listeners, what that means is that ultimately the per pupil funding that goes for your child to attend to school, you now have an account that gives money for you to use services and access anything you can to support your child's education. So, I mean, and that's it. And at the same time, when you have conversations with some progressive Democrats or people who don't agree with the Republican Party and their stance about this, it's just like, oh no, we can't support that, and they immediately say things like it's a voucher program, which in this case it's not a voucher program. And so again, Shaka, when you and I have talked, I'm like, oh my gosh, you are the perfect person to kind of just lay it down to people, like, what is it, what does that mean, and what are some of those opportunities that are out there. So could you just speak to that? Like, not even just ESAs, but like I said, I mentioned like ECCA, FTC, like what are those terms, Shaka? Let us know, enlighten us.
Okay, so I'll hit a couple things, but I love where your head is at because, as you mentioned, education opportunity should not be a partisan thing. No political party has a monopoly on wanting to see the next generation, proficient and ready to lead the country, right? So, anyway, this should not be a partisan thing. It shakes out that way for reasons that we can talk about maybe in part two of this if you'll have me back sometime.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, in terms of what some of these options are, because as as you know, the landscape looks so different now than it did when we were in school. So now, if you're a family in many states, a majority of states, you are no longer just limited to your local zone public school. And let me say, if your local zone public school works for you, fantastic. I'm happy for you. But in some ways, you hit the lottery, right? You either hit the lottery, likely because of real estate. That's such a determinative factor in this. But now, in a majority of states, that's not your only options. You can attend a public charter school, which I know you've talked about on this pod before. So that's an independently managed public school, right? And it can have some more flexibility in terms of its mission and the curriculum and the focus, that sort of thing. Now you can use a program like a voucher to attend a private school. So now I'll start talking about some terms and some of these acronyms because we love acronyms in education. So a voucher is when you get funds that otherwise would have gone with you to the public school, and you can use it for one thing. One thing. You can use it for private school tuition. That's a voucher. So it would be a little bit like if I got you a gift card and it was a Target gift card. You can use that at one place, Target. Now you can use it on multiple things. So in some ways, it's more like if I got you a gift card to a restaurant and said, here's the restaurant that you can use it at. Now what we see are a lot of education savings accounts or education scholarship accounts. Now you can get that money that would have gone with your child to the public school, and you can use it on this range of things. So these are called ESAs. And so you can use that money on curriculum. You can use it on educational service providers like a tutoring service or special education services, lots of different things. So there's a whole range of things. The newest thing, and it's the thing that I'm most excited about recently, it's called the Education Freedom Tax Credit. And it's changed names and acronyms like 5 times. So that's the latest one, and maybe it'll change next month. But the EFTC, Education Freedom Tax Credit, what it allows is it allows everyone who has federal income tax liability. So anybody who pays federal income tax, we see it come out of our check every 2 weeks or what have you. If you have federal income tax liability, instead of paying the federal government, U.S. Treasury, you can direct up to $1,700 of that to a scholarship organization. So that's how it works from a taxpayer standpoint. Then, if you're a parent, you can apply to these various scholarship organizations, and there's going to be some in most states at this point. Hopefully, every state. You can apply to get one of these scholarships, and then the scholarship can be used, according to the rules. But there's a range of different ways that you can use it. So, like an ESA. So I could say contribute $1,700 to a scholarship organization, but I could apply for scholarships for all 3 of my children if I wanted. And maybe the organization is giving $2,000 scholarships. There's no cap on the scholarship amount. And so I could get scholarships for my girls, and maybe that could go towards tuition. Maybe it could go, one of my girls needed some reading tutoring a few years ago. She was having, trouble reading. And that would have been a tremendous help to be able to pay for that with some money from a scholarship organization. So that's going to be available to something like 90% of the students in the United States are going to be eligible for this thing. So it's got a whole lot of potential. Again, that's the EFTC, Education Freedom Tax Credit. And that's something that will start to roll out in 2027.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think as you were talking, I'm sure there's tons of questions that people have, and you pretty much covered all of them. One thing that I have been irked by is the fact that a lot of people don't know this even exists, and we've been talking about it for a while. And so, to your point, like you can actually apply for this you can actually file for this when you file your taxes in 2027. And there's also another layer, which is the scholarship granting organizations that you mentioned, or SGO, which is another term we've seen used a lot. How do you know, or can you share with us, like, what does it mean to be a scholarship organization? and how do people find out where those are for them?
Yeah, great question. So, to be a scholarship granting organization or an SGO, these are going to have to be nonprofit organizations. And so, this was a federal law, and the federal law passed last summer. And so, the rules are still being, codified, and those should be done here shortly. But to be an SGO, it's got to be a nonprofit organization. It has to be approved by the governor in the of the given state. Now, that shouldn't be a big deal, but there are some governors who right now are on the fence. I believe at this point we've got 28 or 29 states have already said, "Hey, we're in. We can't wait to do this." But that means there's a remaining whatever's left there, 21 states or so that are still waiting. I think many of those are going to come around because, frankly, if they don't, that means kids in their state aren't going to get to participate, and you're going to be losing out on, in some cases, billions of dollars.
Yeah, because I'm going to stop you right there because what we're saying is this is money on top of funding you already have. So this is not taking anything out of which currently exists to have for students. It's actually adding on. So this brings me back to the question I asked you before about one of the reasons why we're finding people not opting into this, and governors specifically, is because of this political, battle between conservatives and Democrats about who has the right to even do something like this. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I want our listeners to hear this really clearly because this is money on top of money that already currently exists that you will have access to through the scholarship granting organization, but your governor has to approve it. It's also important to note this because we've got 39 gubernatorial races happening right now across this country. And again, being entrenched in education, I'm constantly having this conversation about when is education going to be sexy to have that be a part of people's platforms to talk about. And if not now, I don't know when, right?
That's right. So, I was just looking at this earlier this week. I was looking at a map of the states that have said that they are going to participate in this program, and then the states that said that they're not going to participate. And what I wanted to know is, okay, if you're a state that's not going to participate, so let me pick on I think one of your former states. Let me pick on California.
I knew you were going to say California.
Well, so listen, I've got family in California, in LA. I've got a niece and nephew out there. I would love for them to be able to, participate in this program. If California doesn't participate, based on the number of eligible taxpayers in the state, it means that California could be missing out. This is on an annual basis on $10.5 billion in new education money. So in my mind, listen, if somebody said, "Hey, do you want $10.5 billion for your state?" and parents get to use it in a way that they think makes sense for their children, it would be crazy to turn that away. So that's what's at stake. So that'll be like we said, that'll be coming online in 2027. If you're a parent interested in learning more about this, let me give a plug here. But you can learn more on our website. It's you can go to Federal Scholarships, and that is federalscholarships.com, and you can learn more about this, and you can even sign up to get updates. It's sort of at the there's a sign up page, because one of the things that we want to do is make sure that every family knows, all right, here's the list of scholarship granting organizations in my area that I can either contribute to if I wanted or apply to, right? And you can do both. And so that information will be coming out, very soon, but you can already sign up for that at federalscholarships.com.
Yeah. And another point that I wanted to note, and this is for our lawmakers, because I talk to lawmakers pretty regularly, and again, we have this political partisan battle back and forth. And I've shared with lawmakers that we're still in a phase of codifying what this means, right? And so from a lawmaker or legislative policy perspective, there's opportunities to amend things, to extend things, to do anything to give yourself an advantage to know what this is. And so this is something that Freedom to Choose Schools has been trying to promote more, is like not only just the education that people need to know about this, but like to not miss this window of opportunity. And if you do, what do you do next? So can you answer that question? Like, okay, January 1st, 2027 comes around. What happens after that?
Yeah, well, I think it's really, really smart that you're encouraging lawmakers to learn what they can as soon as possible and make a decision, because I think there's going to be a real advantage to the states that move first on this, right? Because if you think about how a lot of people are going to give, a lot of people are just going to set this up through their automatic payroll deduction, right? That's a way that you could contribute. And if you do that, you don't even feel it. It's no different.
Almost like an HSA or FSA type of thing. Or,
Well, if you think about, again, you get a paycheck and there's a little line item, FICA, that comes out, and that's federal income tax, right? Well, all this means is that there would be another little line item, and $65 every 2 weeks would move from the FICA line into the scholarship line. So you're actually not feeling any difference, right? It would be your paycheck, your take-home pay would be the exact same. So that's what it works out to be, I think, $65 every 2 weeks. So a lot of people are going to set it up that way. I really believe that if people set that up, they're not going to reset it every year, right? Because we just don't do that. That's not what we typically do. So if you don't move on this and tell taxpayers about this in your state, there's a real risk that you miss out. Because again, in that California example, if California doesn't participate because the governor decides not to, well, all that means is that kids in California can't receive scholarships. Taxpayers in California can still put money in. So all that $10.5 billion could still come out. It's just going to go to scholarships for kids in other states, non-Californians.
Yeah.
So I do think it's really smart to tell governors, hey, you got to move on this sooner than later. Again, if you're a parent, you don't have to apply for anything yet. There's nothing to apply for. That's going to start to happen. You'll start to learn about those SGOs in 2027.
What's interesting about this and what has been just so beguiling about it is the fact that there are things moving that are happening with or without you, right? And
Absolutely.
so exactly what you just named. So you can be resisting for resisting's sake and still see money an opportunity to leave your state where you could actually benefit from it. So I'm glad that you named that. I got to ask you though, so you've worked in civil rights, you have a law degree, you obviously come from a Black and Latino family background. Why is it that so many of our communities specifically are so distrusting of something like this?
Yeah, I think there's probably lots of different ways to think about it. So I'll just kind of touch on a few. I believe that some of this is just still wrapped up in language, and I'll tell you that I had the great fortune of meeting the late Dr. Rod Page. Rod Page, a former U.S. Secretary of Education. I believe he was a superintendent of Houston prior to that. And, African American gentleman, just such a serious thinker, really concerned about kids. And one of the things that he told me, this was years ago, is that he said, for his generation, when they heard school choice, they often thought about white flight. And he said, that he tried, again, when he was speaking to kind of his peers, that he didn't really use that language because he knew that it could turn people off. And so I think that there can still be some, vestiges of that, right? Of just people are locked into to certain language, right? So that's one thing. I also think, like, not for nothing, but leading up to and then following Brown versus Board of Education, if you were a person of color, the biggest education fight there was to get into a public school. Yeah. So I can see how it might feel a little bit counterintuitive to think, oh, well, wait, now are we fighting to get out of them? But here's the thing. Yes, in a sense we are, because it was never about just sitting beside a student of a certain color. It was about the quality of education that kids are receiving. And we should have said, one, yes, of course, kids have a right to attend the school, the school of their zone as per their state constitution. That should have been unequivocal from the jump. That being said, there was nothing magical about who you were going to sit next to. And so I think that it's taken people a long time to kind of go, okay, well, we fought so hard for that thing over there. Are we abandoning it? And what I would say is, no, we're not abandoning it. We are just doubling down on investing in our own children and making sure that what they have at the end of the day works for them.
I agree, Shaka. And I think that specifically for Black and Brown communities, this is where we have to find those investments, because, we have a lot of our listeners, we have a lot of parents who feel stuck, who've been in school systems, who have not had access because they didn't get a chance to get into that charter school that was around the corner, who didn't have the privilege to have transportation to drive to the private school that they may have been able to use a voucher to go to. And so they feel stuck. And again, what we're seeing right now, and I think, very, I would say even for the first time, is that there is just a multitude of options that are out there that you should be diving into. And the reason why we host this podcast is so that you can hear all of them and learn and educate yourself on how to get access to them. And again, to see this at the federal level, where now it's not just saying we're giving you access with all these different options at your fingertips, but we're also putting funding behind those options. It's just incredible. And it's just, it's unfortunate that we have opposition that still wants to keep the status quo, especially even when you think about outside of this conversation. There's another conversation about AI. And I just recently went to the ASU GSV conference in San Diego, and the whole conversation about, is artificial intelligence going to take over our education? Again, that's a podcast for another time as well. However, it's like innovation is not a threat to education. It is a supplement, right? And to have people still under this traditional mindset, when literally everything is at our fingertips, but you still want kids to exist in a certain type of school building.
Yeah.
You have 3 children. I have 3 children. All 3 of my children learn and think differently. I'm so happy that I know of the other options that are available to them, because where one child may have thrived in a certain traditional setting, the other one did not thrive at all. And this is what we're seeing right now today. I have to ask you though, what do you see the education landscape looking like in the next 3 to 5 years?
Great question. I think that one of the places where we're going to continue to see a lot of innovation, and I try not to use the word disruption too much when I talk about education, maybe because I used to work in schools, and if you work in a school building with 500 kids, you are trying to have as little disruption as possible.
Fair. That's fair. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But I understand when people use the word, do I think that we need to disrupt the macro system? Absolutely. As a parent, do I want a peaceful house that's disruption free? 100%. Okay. Where I think that we're going to see a lot of innovation, though, in the next 3 to 5 years, I really do believe that you're going to see it in this small school models space. There are some real efficiencies and economics of scale to having a big district. That being said, I think those efficiencies have started to narrow as technology improves, as we're able to do things like, whether it's AI enhanced or other computer enhanced education, remote things, virtual things. It's no longer the case that to homeschool your children, either mom or dad has to have been a trained educator. That's just not the case, right? My high schooler asked a question, to me, it felt like an intense question about math homework. I had no idea how to do it. But guess what? I could figure out in about 45 seconds. We could work this out together and get there. All right. Now, we've got to be careful when we talk about AI because finding the answer isn't the same thing as internalizing the method and actually having the knowledge. So that's for another conversation. But but the thing that I think is innovative is that now it means that families that um, were not freed up to even consider like a small school model because they work during the day, because they, for whatever reasons, normal, reasonable things. Now they're freed up to think about these things. So it's why I think coming out of the pandemic, I think the highest area of growth was African American homeschool
Yeah,
families.
13%. Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's off the charts.
Hmm.
Um, I think that sort of thing is going to continue to happen, and the cities and states that will thrive will be the ones that figure out how to continue to um, have kids from all over the community do things like participate in athletics, participate in arts together, right? Because there's nothing like just because you go to a micro school with 15 other kids doesn't mean that you should be excluded from some of these other things. So I think the districts that figure this out, or the charter school networks or the private school leagues or whatever that figure this out, are going to be really attractive to families who are looking for more customized, education for their kids. So that's where I see things going. I think things like that education freedom tax credit are going to accelerate this because it means that 90% of families could get a scholarship that will help them either change their current education setting or like add on to it and do some really cool customization. So I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's super exciting as well. And we will continue to be here to not only beat the drum to that excitement, but also to be intentional about making sure that in our schools, the students are seeing leaders and educators that also mirror their identities, because that's also a huge and critical point of this work that we often talk about that does not get valued and actually has some direct links to success. So you write extensively, and I always get inspired by some of the things that I've seen you write on Substack and op-eds. One of the things you wrote about was what does democracy require when it comes to education? So I want to ask you, for all of those who didn't read that article, what does democracy require when it comes to education?
Yeah, well, um, one of the things that I believe it requires is us listening to one another. Um, when I think about, and I actually have a new piece that is coming out really soon about this, but one of the things that I think is often missed in our policy debates, whether it's at the legislature or at a school board meeting, I think people often talk past one another because they fail to realize that we may want the same thing. We may want kids to succeed, like broadly speaking, but we all prioritize values a little bit differently. And so if if I prioritize the value of liberty over the value of equality, well, that's going to it might lead me to a different policy outcome than the reverse, right? And so I talk about these four values: liberty, equality, community, and efficiency, as being these kind of like on a compass, like a pole, the four poles on a compass. And this is an idea that I, stole from James O'Toole, this who writes about this stuff or has written about this stuff. But I think we just sometimes forget to listen, and a democracy requires us to listen to people, hear their value set and how they prioritize things, and then see if we can come at consensus. And I would say it also a and this is going to evidence one of my values. I would say it also means that if we're going to live in harmony with each other, that we are trying to do no harm to the other side. And that takes patience. We are not in a world right now that has time for a lot of patience, but I think that's what it requires if we're going to achieve the best outcomes for our kids.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaka. And thank you so much for just enlightening so many of our listeners. I think there a lot of people should be, if not, taking notes about what we've heard today. And we will definitely make sure that we share all the resources so that people can hear more about the work that you're doing and learn more from you. The final question I have for you is a question that we ask all of our guests, and it is basically a play on our words, being that we talk about choice words, school choices, options. What's your choice?
Thank you for this conversation and for having me on and inviting me on. I'm glad I get to participate. You've had some great guests. Um, I'll actually go back to something that I remember Dr. Page, who we spoke about earlier, that he said, and I'll just paraphrase him. But I think it's really relevant because right now there are a lot of people around the country who seem to be, in some sense, questioning the value of education. And you see this in higher ed, but you also see this sometimes in, I think, in K-12 schools. Um, Rod Page said to me, and he said to a group that I was a part of, he said, our founding documents in the United States say that all men and women are created equal. He said, but they're not going to stay that way very long without an education. And I thought that'll preach. I think we've got to reinvest in our commitment to educating all children, because even though like my value set may skew towards that, individualism, and I'm going to do things for my family, sure, but education is still a community endeavor, right? I need your children to do well because we're going to be in community with each other, right? You need my children to do well. The ones down the street, I need them to do well. It doesn't matter if we attend the same school or not. We should all be striving for better outcomes. I still think that education is the surest way to achieve that, especially in this rapidly changing world. So those are my choice words.
Well, thank you so much, Shaka, and thank you to all of our listeners. As we mentioned, this episode was about access and opportunity. And what we should know from this is access is not abstract. It's a school, it's a seat at the table, it's opening up a door. And if that door is closed, it's finding ways to reopen that door, reimagine what that door could look like. I am your host, J. Artist Wright. This has been a great episode. I hope everyone has enjoyed it as much as I have. We at Freedom to Choose Schools will keep fighting to ensure that access to quality school options is not only accessible, but also equitable, and especially for our most underserved communities. Shaka, thank you. Thank you for all our listeners, and we'll see you next time.